And then in 2015, and I'm would watch this firsthand because I was covering presidential campaigns by that point for Rolling Stone. When Donald Trump came onto the scene, that was when this phenomenon really started to explode. And I was on the campaign trail in the summer of 2015 when Trump first went on the trail. And immediately I started to hear reporters talk about a new dynamic that had been introduced into our business lives. There were really two things happening. The first thing that was happening was that Donald Trump was making everybody an enormous amount of money. And we just could not avoid the reality of this. If you worked at a television show or a station and you were doing TV news, it was impossible not to notice that Donald Trump got you great ratings. And it didn't matter how you covered him, whether you covered him negatively or positively, or down the middle, didn't matter. As long as you put Donald Trump on screen, it got great ratings. Same if you worked in print, it didn't matter what you said about Donald Trump, but whatever you wrote about him got tons and tons of clicks. Right. And that was absolutely true compared to any other candidate. And if you look back at the coverage from that time, it's not hard to see how this impacted editorial decisions. CNN infamously showed a picture of an empty podium waiting for Trump to arrive rather than show an actual candidate talking about something because the ratings were higher waiting for Trump than they were for people watching a different candidate speak. When people went back and looked at the numbers, they found that during the primary season, Donald Trump got about 23 times as much coverage as Bernie Sanders did on television on the other side, which was fascinating because these were two very similar stories, strictly from an objective point of view. They were both stories about insurgent campaigns who challenged the traditional bureaucracy of an entrenched party bureaucracy. And yet Trump got this overwhelmingly larger amount of coverage than Sanders did, even though they were performing similarly early in the process. And this put media companies in a pickle because there was now a problem. They didn't know how to handle this, especially once Trump won the nomination or once he locked up the nomination. Now there were all these conversations. What do we do? Do we continue taking the money? Do we continue bringing in all these ratings? How do we deal with this? Are we responsible for giving him all this attention? Were we responsible for helping him win the nomination? And is there going forward? Should we cover him less? What should we do? And the answer that most news companies settled on was actually to cover him more than they had before, but to change their editorial approach and to just simply add more editorializing and more negative slant. So this was presented as an ethical change. Jim Rutenberg of the New York Times in the summer of 2016 wrote a piece that was very influential called "Trump is Testing the Norms of Objectivity in Journalism." And he wrote that Trump was so dangerous that the job of journalism now is no longer just to be true, but to, quote, be true to readers and viewers and true to the facts in a way that will stand up to history's judgment. And essentially, this meant we had to be more aggressive in covering him. He quoted Carolyn Ryan, who was the senior editor for politics at the time, who said that the proper formula for this candidate was, quote, copious coverage and aggressive coverage. So just as much or more Trump, but more aggressive coverage of Trump. The Columbia Journalism Review later did a study that showed the coverage of Trump actually skyrocketed and went sharply up, beginning in early 2016. At precisely that moment I mentioned, when all of us on the trail were talking about this dilemma, it was a dilemma that was both a commercial dilemma and an ethical dilemma. The CJR also found that coverage of Trump became significantly less policy focused and more focused on his personality as 2016 went on. And I want to stress that I don't have any problem with negative coverage of Donald Trump. In fact, I wrote quite a lot of it in 2016, but this created a problem. And the problem was that this new formula that we had adopted of copious coverage and aggressive coverage, it fit perfectly into the commercial needs of the news business, the corporate news business. Trump is basically the perfect modern media product. And what do I mean by that? In the post-Object Taibbi era, once Fox shot up to the top of the ratings, media companies learned that there's a consistent, dependable way to make money. And the first thing you do is you identify your audience, then you relentlessly feed that audience streams of stories that validate your audience's belief systems. And the easiest way to attract an audience is to publish stories that present people that your audience does not like in negative light. And Fox did this again in the 90s and 2000s, and they were introducing a regular stream of foes for their audience to digest and to think about. And this included terrorists and criminals. Feminists were often presented as a villain. Liberals during the Gulf War, the French became the villain. It was one different cast of villains after another, and this was designed to scare audiences, to enrage them, to agitate them, and addict them again to the experience of getting upset. When Trump arrived in the scene, it was now very easy to do this, not just to conservative audiences, but to liberal audiences as well. Media companies figured out that all they had to do to consistently make money was to wave Trump at people all day long. And so the arrival of Trump on the scene in 2005 coincided and has coincided with a huge surge in profitability, especially for the cable news business. Since Trump announced his run for the presidency in 2015, cable news revenues are up 38%. And this is a dynamic that everybody in the news business understands. Conversely, when you wave a villain at your audience and you feed it streams of stories that constantly tell them one thing and validate their negative opinion of somebody, there is an important counter principle to that, which is that you challenge or confuse your audience or introduce a new element. Once you've gone down that road, you will lose market share. And a case study that I like to cite about this involved the Young Turks, that some folks might be familiar with that channel. It's a sort of liberal, independent news network. And the anchor person for that network, Cenk Uygur, in a documentary called All Government Lie that I was also in about the news business, he talked about how in 2008, the Young Turks built up its audience, appealing to sort of young fans of Barack Obama, and they surged in popularity as Obama rode all the way to the White House, and there was an enormous upswing in audience the more they talked about Obama's successful campaign. When they switched in 2009 to actually covering Obama's presidency, which required them occasionally to be negative about Obama, they lost a lot of market share. And they found that the more they talked about things like Obama's handling of the financial crisis, that this affected their financial bottom line. And to their credit, they continued to do that coverage anyway, but that is not a decision that most big corporate outlets will make. In the Trump era, it became possible for these big corporate outlets to avoid the problem of ever confusing or upsetting your audience at all. Really, what's happened since 2016 is the news landscape is split into two different groups. There's news for people who love Trump, and that's, Fox and the Daily Caller and Breitbart. And then there's news for people who can't stand Trump, and that's all the other stations that you're familiar with, MSNBC in particular. And the world as represented in these news programs now is almost exactly like Crossfire, which I talked about before. You only see two different ideas. There's pro-Trump and anti-Trump. The ideas are shown to be in constant combat. There's no pretense of a hope for cooperation or cooperation, and the audiences are completely, almost perfectly siloed. There was a study by the Pew Center that came out just a few weeks ago that showed that of people who identify Fox as their primary news source, 93% of those people are Republicans. For MSNBC, the number is an exact mirror. It's 95% Democrats. The New York Times, for the people who identify that as their primary news source, 91% of those people are Democrats. People who call NPR their primary news source, 87% of those people are now Democrats. So basically, most news channels now are talking exclusively to one set of people or another. And while I want to stress that as a business, the news media was headed this way a long time before Trump, but we've now arrived at a place where the sort of good morning everybody model that was geared towards delivering information to the broad mean has been switched out for a new model. And I had a Facebook executive describe to me what that was. And in his words, he calls it audience optimized framing, in which the job is less about delivering information than it is about targeting an audience, identifying an audience, and then finding content to match and reassure that audience in regular fashion.